me, Corgan, from the Smashing Pumpkins.
Am I official blogger now?
You are an official online techie geek influencer, social media elite expert.
Wasn't really what I had in mind back in my bedroom.
Welcome to episode 88 of the Hipsters United podcast. My name is Chris, and joining me this week are Jason.
Hello.
And Susan.
Hello.
Now, would you guys consider yourself techie elite social media influencers?
Absolutely.
We have almost 4,000 followers on Twitter. And that's like a fraction of what Brian Solis has.
Really?
Doesn't he have like over 100,000? We're actually checking. This is the first thing on the podcast. How many Twitter followers does Brian Solis have?
This
128,000
influencers. Wow.
How many of those are like bots, though? How many of those are like of actual human beings who are functionally bots?
Well, before we get into that, I wanted to start out this week by talking about Billy's appearances at South by Southwest a couple of weeks ago, and unfortunately the video of Billy's hour-long panel discussion with Brian Solis has not been posted yet, and due to some scheduling conflicts, we couldn't really wait any longer for this podcast. But Jason and Susan, you guys both attended some of the other festivities, and Susan, I know you attended the documentary called The Source about the Source family religious community that Billy and Carrie Brown were quasi-members of a few years back, and Billy made an appearance in the documentary and later attended a screening and took some questions about it, but I wanted to get your thoughts on the documentary. My gut reaction to all things Source family is crazy cults, but I'm sure that's not really fair. Did this documentary change any preconceptions you had about the Source family?
Well, I truly didn't know a whole lot about the Source family, so I guess I learned a whole lot about them. I actually think it was, some of it was sort of more disturbing and cultish than maybe I thought it would be. It was very interesting. The documentary was well done. I went knowing that Billy had involvement with these people, not knowing that he would actually make a brief appearance in the film. So that was kind of an extra bonus. It was really crazy. Father Yod was like totally wackadoo. This guy.
Are you sure it wasn't Yod?
Yod? I don't.
Yodi?
Yeah. Yeah. No, he was really a wacky guy, and I'm kind of a feminist. I concentrated in women's studies, and so this guy who has basically, I thought the most moving thread of the whole story was he had this wife that he got married right when Father Yod was starting his health food restaurant. And this woman was like madly...
Before he was Father Yod.
Yeah, before he was Father Yod, when he was Jim Baker. And when he took on the 14 wives, this woman's life was she was crushed. And it was just very, very saddening. And several of the other women sort of talked about being commanded to be with various men, not really getting to choose who their lovers were, or sexual partners, whatever you want to call it. So I found that sort of all very, very upsetting and disturbing. At the same time, it's pretty clear that a lot of the people, even some of the people who maybe don't do the cult practices these days, found it to be a very influential and positive force in their life, which I found interesting. So I don't know. It was a very interesting documentary. It didn't want to make me want to convert. Make me want to convert to the Source religion by any means. I don't know.
So did it go up through like today, or did it stop with the end of Father Yod?
It stopped with the end of Father Yod. So he hang glides off a cliff in is it 76, I think, something like that. He hang glides off a cliff and he dies. And, pretty quickly the cult broke up after that. However, they did talk to all the people who were interviewed. They sort of gave a what happened next. So they had them comment a little bit about their experiences. And then they had, a little paragraph that flashed on the screen that explained what that person was doing now. So, it was very interesting. Like, one of the guys was a leading stem cell researcher in California. Another guy, he was like an investor. Like, he invested, the one guy I think was kind of like a entrepreneur. Others were doing their music and art and gardening in Hawaii and still kind of like doing the religious practices that they had learned under Father Yod. So they kind of showed that a little bit, but pretty much it ended. I mean, I think once he was gone, everybody pretty much split up. And most of them seemed to leave Hawaii at that point. But
so what part did Billy talk about then? Because, I mean, he had a few lines, didn't he?
Yeah, he was in there fairly briefly. He was discussing specifically the music of the of Yahweh 13, and he was saying that it was very significant to him and to the culture, he felt, because it was a spiritual music. So it was like a jam band, not really a jam band, kind of, but they were doing it. It was an explicitly spiritually led one, and he found that to be very unique and inspiring. And I think obviously that's where his interest in their music probably comes from. So that's what he was brought in to sort of talk about when they were the segment talking about their music and how they kind of had this band. They actually had they had amazing footage anybody who has the opportunity to see this should see it, because some of the footage is hilarious. Like, they would go around to different high schools, the Yahweh 13, and do these concerts, which were like kind of recruitment events, sort of. They wanted to show off how cool and psychedelic they were and like spread their message and maybe get some more members, right? And so they had this footage of the band playing at Beverly Hills High School, and they're just like, Father Yod is just like drumming away, and it pans around to these kids at Beverly Hills High School, and they're just like, what? It's like, it's pretty priceless. But it was very interesting, and I thought the documentary was very well done. Even though it was obviously like the two parties that were the most heavily involved in creating it. I think they were ISIS Aquarian and Electricity Aquarian, and they're very much, I would kind of say they're very much pro Father Yod, pro the family, don't really have a whole lot of critiques of what happened. So from that you might think it was not going to be a very balanced view, but it was a very balanced view, and it did portray the events from kind of all sides. So, I don't know. The cult certainly wasn't probably as harmful as something like, Heaven's Gate, obviously. The only person who died was Father Yod, but they were pretty interesting, so it's an interesting film.
And did it ever come out what Billy talked about at this panel that he went to afterwards, or did we ever hear anything about that?
I haven't seen anything about that. I don't know. I wouldn't put it past that somebody had tweeted about it, but I certainly didn't see it if it happened. So, whatever he said at the showing that he attended, because I think it screened like 3 times, and I went to the first showing and he went to like the second or third one. So, which was in a much smaller theater. So.
I guess he clearly didn't call anyone a stripper or anything like that, so there was
if he
nothing
had done
newsworthy
that,
to say.
I'm sure we'd hear about it. Yeah.
Well, besides the Brian Solis panel and the Source Family documentary panel, Billy also made a couple of other shorter appearances, one on the Google Play stage, and the other was an interview with Shira Lazar for a show called What's Trending, which was the quote that I played at the beginning of this podcast, which has to be one of the most ridiculous things I've ever heard. But both videos have been available on hipstersunited.com for a while, and I'm sure most of you listening have seen the videos. Billy didn't announce anything major in terms of Pumpkins news at them, but he did have a couple of candid discussions about the music industry and the role of social media in music. And in the Alex Jones interview, which we'll talk about a bit later, both Alex and Billy talked a bit derisively about the trendies and the beards that descended upon Austin for South by Southwest. But clearly what Billy had to say, especially about artists' use of social media, was pretty relevant for the context. I mean, that's, in my mind, that's kind of what South by Southwest is about. It's about music and it's about social media. And Jason, I've obviously never been, but I have this image of Billy is very much rejecting the whole indie ideal and embracing the mainstream, while the image I have of South by Southwest is kind of one that celebrates the indie ideal while, at the same time being quite commercial, I'm sure. But can you kind of describe to those of us who've never been what South by Southwest is like and kind of how Billy's ethos kind of corresponds to that?
Sure. I haven't been living in Austin very long. Austin is where South by Southwest is held every year, and so it's new to me. I don't even want to say I've been to South by Southwest, because I think that's like a ridiculous statement, because the scope of it, the size of it, is just unbelievable. I mean, if you go to Lollapalooza or something, there's a main stage, and there's maybe one or two or three other stages, and you certainly can't see everything that happens at Lollapalooza, but there's a definite focal point. I mean, if you go to Lollapalooza, everybody's kind of in one area. South by Southwest is not like that at all. It's a very decentralized event. It happens all across Austin, particularly in downtown, but in other parts of the city too, near the University of Texas campus, there's quite a bit that happens. But basically, for 4 days, every 2-bit bar and restaurant and library, okay, maybe not a library, but whatever else, anywhere that can throw up a stage, will have 4 days of bands, like all day and all evening. I mean, it's like 100 music festivals, but it's just like a ton of club shows. Do you see what I mean? So the music festival analogy is kind of a failure. I don't think there's a real word for what South by Southwest is. Conference is closest, but yeah, and at the same time all these shows are going on, there's these industry bigwigs having just a typical like convention. They're at the convention center downtown going to talks all day. So there's like talks all day, and then there's concerts all night. There's also concerts during the day, but those are unofficial. But what you have are all these bands who are coming in town to play official showcases, and those take place almost entirely at night. And so basically the executives and the industry people are here, and they go to panels during the day, and then they go to concerts at night. The concerts are showcases. Well, so what are the bands going to do? They're here for 4 days to like maybe play 1 or 2 or 3 showcases, right? But they're all in town, and so the bands will like go play shows during the day and at just someplace in Austin. And the crazy thing is, most of what goes on is free. Almost all of the unofficial concerts are free. The showcases often you have to pay to get in, and sometimes you can't get in because the convention attendees have badges. The badges run like $1,000, and the badge gets you into anything so long as it's not full by the time you get there, right? Like the badge holders have top priority to get into any of the showcases. But any space that's left over, people who have bought wristbands, which are in the $100 to $200 range, I think, they have kind of second priority to get into showcases, and then after that it's just like anybody can show up and buy their way into a showcase. And this year I went to see Fiona Apple, and I didn't even have a wristband, but we got in, and we paid $30. There was another showcase I went to where I paid $8. Everything else I went to, I didn't pay anything. And anyone who follows us on Twitter knows some of the bands I saw. I saw Maps and Atlases, I saw Japan Droids, I saw Youth Lagoon and the OCs, and all these bands, and I didn't pay anything to see any of those bands. So it's a very crazy event. Anyone who calls it a music festival, I think, is actually misleading you, but I am still empathetic to them because I don't think there's a real word for what South by Southwest is. It's just a crazy, crazy thing. So anyway, you can see why Billy would both be drawn here to participate in it and why it's somehow not an ideal thing for him to be taking part in, because it's mostly about like young artists or not established artists trying to catch the eye of industry people, right? But there's so much action happening here, right? The industry people are here, right? And they're all talking to each other and looking for artists and talking about music and interacting with their colleagues from all across the country. So there's like, it's a crazy draw, and major artists do come and play here during South by Southwest, even though they're not trying to get discovered. So last year, the Strokes played a huge show. Kanye West played. This year, the big shows were Jay-Z and Bruce Springsteen. And I'm really only scratching the surface. Mumford & Sons played a huge show. I mean, it's crazy.
Mumford & Sons played my parking garage. I'm not kidding.
Well, it was a field across the street from the parking garage. Yeah, that was a crazy... We had just hopscotched around downtown, going from, like, places that were packed to places that were packed. I mean, there's, like, all these venues downtown Austin. Every one of them is full. Places that don't usually host music are also full. So we're hopping around downtown all day going to shows. We catch a ride back to where we'd left our car because we didn't want to drive downtown. And it turned out the parking garage we were in was across the street from a field where they had decided to put on Mumford & Sons and Edward Sharpe and the Magnetic Zeros. And there was, thousands of people there. And we literally, like, got dropped off as you could hear Mumford & Sons were literally in the middle of The Cave, which is their huge hit. So, it's just the strangest thing to be, like, going around to all these packed concerts. You get driven halfway across town, and, like, you're let out of your car, and, like, one of the most famous bands is playing, like, one of the biggest hits of the last year, like, right there. Like, we were literally dropped off, and the back of the stage was across the street, and you could see this marching band that they had behind them. Like, you saw the backs of their, like, hats. And that song was just echoing, and everybody knows that song. And it ended, and we couldn't even see the crowd. It ended, and you just heard this roar from thousands of people, and it's just like, this thing is just beyond crazy. So anyway, that's a really long answer. But, so there's all these, hungry young artists here for South by Southwest, and a lot of people have criticized, like, when people like Jay-Z, Mumford & Sons, Bruce Springsteen, Kanye West, the Strokes. A lot of people have criticized. Counting Crows were here this year. A lot of people have said, well, that's not really in the spirit of South by Southwest. It's supposed to be about discovering new artists, not like coming in and having a big, like, huge concert event. Personally, living in Austin, getting to go to this thing every year, please, major artists, keep coming, keep having your cool concerts. I think some of that criticism has waned because it is just such a good time. But, I think people are probably asking, why didn't Billy play? And I think the reason is, I think if you're going to do that, I think you'd better make a big deal out of it. I don't think it would have worked for Billy just to start playing in a coffee house here. It just wouldn't have been the right setting. So I don't know. Can you give me a more specific question, I guess?
I guess I can give you a follow-up question. So in these things that Billy talked at that we have the videos of, one of the things that he pushed repeatedly was, his newfound appreciation of the album as an art form rather than the single, which, of course, is contrary to what his approach was with Tear Garden by Kaleidoscope, where he attempted to write singles and release them one at a time, and I think he's more and more saying that, that kind of approach doesn't work. And a lot of his argument, I think, is centered around the fact that singles today don't have the impact or cultural significance of albums 20 or 30 years ago. I know on the Google Play video, he went into that a lot, where the Google Play guy just started, like, throwing names of bands at him and asking Billy, like, whether they were big album bands and what their biggest album was. And it was funny that the first one that the guy said, Billy named a song rather than an album. And the guy kind of said,
wasn't it the Kinks, and Billy said Waterloo Sunset?
It was the Kinks. I forget what Billy said.
Yeah, I think he said Waterloo Sunset. But the guy claimed it was a single, like Waterloo Sunset is on something else.
Right.
I don't know. I remember seeing that and thinking that the interviewer's response didn't make a lot of sense. But
it was overall a very strange kind of interview. Like, the 5 minutes in, the guy just starts throwing out bands and asking Billy like what their big album was. But I mean, what do you think about what Billy's saying about albums? Like, are you at all kind of, thrown off by the fact that this is contrary to what he said before? Do you think that that obviously he explored this thing with Tiergarten and is now kind of changing his mind based on what's happened with Tiergarten? Do you think that the general audience really will still be impacted by a great album? Like he says that there's still an opportunity for someone to still write a great album and kind of capture the culture.
Well, I think my response is kind of layered. I think people in the hardcore Pumpkins fan base, our readers, people on the O board, those types of people are very excited. I think a lot of them are very pumped about it. When I see our comments, when I think back to the way the comments were before the album was announced, to the excitement when they announced the album back in April of last year. I think our fans, the Pumpkins fans and our readers sort of generally view the Pumpkins as an album band who've done these thematic albums, and that this is really a return to what they like about the Pumpkins. As far as myself personally, I guess I'll speak to that next. I have mixed feelings about it. I thought Tiergarten was kind of cool, a cool experiment. I liked the idea of it. I would have maybe liked to see him go at it for a little bit longer to see if anything changed. He seemed fairly convinced it wasn't going to change. He obviously is seeing the numbers, the download numbers and stuff, and I'm not privy to that information. I really liked the concept of it, of getting songs for free, of getting them semi-frequently. I kind of think nostalgically back to Tiergarten because it's kind of the Spirits in the Sky / early Tiergarten music that got me back into the band because I wasn't following the band or Billy's activities for several years. So, I enjoy, for the most part, I enjoy the Tiergarten songs more than I do the Zeitgeist songs. So, I would have liked to maybe see him keep at it a little bit longer. I think he tried something. It didn't work. I don't know. I think he is right. I don't necessarily think he is being hypocritical. I think there's an argument to be made that, he said the album is dead. He still thinks it's dead as far as dead in the culture. But he's decided now that his mission is to try to revive it through this project of whatever he's going to do with releasing a visual experience or whatever it's going to be, sort of vague pronouncements about what that might be. So I don't think it's necessarily contradictory because he's still saying, I think, that the album is dead in our culture. Maybe, I have to go back and look, but maybe, we were wrong or he was wrong about whether the album was a dead thing for, Billy Corgan. Obviously he still thinks it's something that he's going to put his passion into. I don't know, on some other level, as far as the greater culture and his goals to get people to listen to a full album, I mean, it's pretty hard. I mean, I rarely sit down and listen to an album. I listen to music while I'm doing other things, and I'm a music fan and I love music. But I think a lot of it's gonna greatly depend on the quality of whatever visual experience or whatever album experience he's going to put out there. And my sense is that to draw people in, it's going to have to be pretty darn good quality. And is the time and frankly the money going to be put into it that needs to be to make it successful in the wider culture? I don't know. I think he possibly could do it. But I mean, Bjork did a similar thing with her App album, got a lot of press for it, got a lot of buzz about it, about how innovative it was, and how successful was it in the culture. I mean, I own the album, but I haven't like downloaded any of the apps or played around with that or even really thought much about that. So I don't
Well, in
know
this
how.
Google Play interview, one of Billy's measurements for whether an artist is really huge is, grandma's heard of it, which
Yeah.
is kind of his thing of where even if you aren't like a fan, everyone is aware of this artist and knows what they're doing.
Yeah, I mean, I posted a long thing about this in the HU comments at that point, but I don't.
Mark, isn't she the one with where's the goose?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that. I don't know. I'm gonna depart with Billy there. I respect his views, but I don't really think, to me, it's not important if my grandma knows about it or my mom. It just matters to me that he's putting out really good music. I don't see why there have to be these bands that everyone knows about that's making a huge cultural impact.
Well, and I would say there still are those kinds of bands, but they're not rock bands. Exactly. Like, I mean, there are still big pop stars, obviously. There's Lady Gaga, just like there was Madonna and those types of pop stars. But I think that in a lot of cases, like kind of the bigger hip hop acts have taken the place of the big rock acts in terms of, their albums become very famous.
Well, I just think that I could go on about this at length. I'll stop myself from doing it. But I think that I'm not sure I agree that what's needed for a revolutionary, that rock music needs to have this revolutionary message that reaches anybody. I kind of see that period as maybe a fading cultural, it's a point in time where that seemed to be, for 20 or 30 years, that seemed to be the case, and maybe the culture's changing. And that to me is okay. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, you think about rock and roll, it's kind of a generic rebellion against your parents, right? But like when your parents grew up listening to rock and roll, it becomes different. I want to say my 2 cents about Tiergarten and the album thing, but I've kind of said it. I think I've said it on previous podcasts. I know I've tweeted about it, so I'll kind of keep it short. But I basically think Billy is drawing the right lesson from Tiergarten, which is that even if people don't listen to albums sequentially, people don't get talking on websites about singles. The media will not spend a ton of ink writing about you if you put out one song. It just doesn't work that way. Like, I think they just feel like it's not worthy of even an article, I mean, you can barely get, like, a paragraph. You can barely get a website like Pitchfork to write a paragraph about a song, right? But when there's an album, everybody is, like, compelled to write about that. And when the Pumpkins put out Oceania, they will get a wave of press attention that will dwarf anything they ever got for Tiergarten. And that alone justifies Billy's return to the album, in my view. I think Tiergarten was, it's a cliche, a noble experiment. I think his idea was, I don't see anyone listening to albums. People just don't listen to my albums anymore. They're listening to the 1 or 2 songs they want. So, I mean, he said this, so how many times did he say this? So I'm just going to do singles. Why put all the effort into the album? But then he did it, and he realized, like, he couldn't break through the cultural, like, attention filter because the press wouldn't give him any attention for one song at a time, right? I think he was totally right about people's listening habits. But it doesn't matter because you can't get the cultural attention with a single. So you have to make an album so that the New York Times and Pitchfork and Rolling Stone and NME will write about you. And then people will, like, download your album or give your single a chance because they've heard about it then, right? So he was right, but it just didn't work in terms of making any impact at all. It's weird, but it's like you have to have an album to get people to pay attention to your single.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I just want to reiterate. I agree. I think that the music websites will review Oceania, will pay attention to it, but will he meet his goal of getting, everybody in their kitchen sink to sit down and watch some comprehensive video that comes out with the album or whatever that might be? I don't know. It's going to have to be pretty dang good for that to happen. And even then it might not. I don't know.
Like, Billy said something recently, like he thinks the Smashing Pumpkins are the real revolution. It's like, what is the content of the revolution? I'm a huge fan, and I'm not sure what the content of the revolution is. Like, I'm supposed to get Oceania, and then what? But I think that's a good segue into something else, the second topic we want to cover tonight. And in a little deviation from our usual format, I'm going to take the lead, and I'm going to ask Chris what he thinks about the hour-long interview Billy did with noted conspiracy theorist and radio host, is that true? Alex Jones, a resident of Austin, coincidentally. Not to be confused with Art Bell. But Chris is something of HU's resident advocate of science. And I don't know, maybe that's saying too much. But I'll let Chris speak for himself. But they covered a variety of topics. A lot of things Billy has not spoken much about in the past publicly. Particularly, I don't want to say politics, but let's say political philosophy. Questions of, culture. And, some really interesting stuff. I have things to say about it, too. Let's let Chris start. Chris, reactions to Billy Corgan on Alex Jones. Was he crazy? Was he not crazy? Do you like what he had to say? Is Alex Jones crazy? Should Billy have gone on this program? What do you think?
Well, first of all, I would agree with your assessment that I am HU's resident science person. So I don't know if that's
science
really
correspondent.
The best way to say it. I'm not like Bill Nye or anything like that.
Reporting tonight from science, I'm
If
Chris.
only you were. I like Bill Nye.
When I first heard about this interview, I was I don't know if I want to say terrified. I was more giddy, like in anticipation of the crazy stuff, that Billy could possibly be talking about. I actually wasn't familiar with Alex Jones before this, but I mean, I did a little bit of Googling about him, and there was a lot of stuff about Alex Jones has never met a conspiracy theory he doesn't agree with, and all this kind of stuff. And I mean, based on what Billy has said in the past, both on Twitter and on his website, everything from here to there, Billy has also espoused some conspiracy theories, particularly the chemtrails issue. I was expecting just a full-blown hour of crazy, which in retrospect I shouldn't have been expecting. I mean, I've experienced Billy Corgan as a public figure for a number of years now, and I don't know why I would think all of a sudden he would come out and just act like a completely crazy lunatic after many, many years being in the public eye and not really doing that. So, I mean, I guess, first of all, I have to give Billy quite a bit of credit for his appearance in this program, even though I think he agrees with a lot of the stuff that Alex Jones says in that are some of the more crazier conspiracy theory type things. In this interview, Billy was fairly measured, especially in the face of Alex Jones spouting some pretty aimless, non-specific claims. And I posted a comment about this. As I was watching this video, I posted a stream of comments to hipstersunited.com.
You're totally right!
Pumpkins. Yeah, that basically was it. So Billy would talk for a minute or two and, kind of see both sides of something and be very careful about explaining his position. And Alex Jones would just bust in with bogus numbers. Just like out of nowhere, just like he couldn't go more than 2 minutes without saying something. He just had to.
Yeah, it's a load of crap.
Exactly. And Billy, a number of times, he does defer to Alex Jones by not necessarily agreeing with him, but saying, well, Alex, you did the research on this, so I'll defer to you. And if this were a real political debate, I would hope that whoever was sitting across the table from Alex Jones would ask him to back up some of his more outrageous claims with specific evidence and research. But I mean, this wasn't. This was just an interview with Billy Corgan about stuff. So I'm not going to hold Billy Corgan up to the standards of Richard Dawkins or somebody doing a full-blown debate with Alex Jones. So actually, overall, I think Billy acquitted himself quite well on this. There are definitely things he said that I don't agree with, but there are also some things that he talked about I do agree with. He talked about Joseph Kony quite a bit, the Kony 2012 campaign that I'm sure no one has been able to escape hearing about. In case you have, in short, a viral video came out a few weeks ago talking about this gentleman, Joseph Kony, who was the leader of a group in Africa that was enslaving and slaughtering children and recruiting children for his army and things like that. And it's all very terrible. And this video was, a call to arms for people to, talk to your political leaders and get justice for this man. And very quickly, within a day or two, people started to actually look into this, and more detail started to arise about, the fact that Joseph Kony, a lot of the actions they were describing, this was 5 or 6 years ago, and it's not exactly what they were saying in this video. So I don't think that the video was successful in, getting this huge revolution, but it did get a lot of attention. And Billy talked a lot about how after this video got posted, he was someone that people went to as not a political figure, but a well-known figure, as, hey, Billy, like, what do you think about this Kony thing? Get involved, you're an important person who has the ear of important people. Why don't you go tell them to, bring Joseph Kony to justice? And Billy wouldn't do that. He said he wanted to think about it and look into it before he did anything like that. And he said that the reaction of some people after he did that was that, oh, like, what's the matter? Like, you're against children or something like that. And I agree with him that stuff like that does happen. Like, whenever there is a movement, it gets boiled down to either you agree with everything about this, or you hate children, or you are a Nazi or something like that. And I totally agree with Billy that it's important to look into things before you dive in and become part of something, even if it's the popular thing on Twitter at the time. And this is not anything new for Billy. If you remember when the song Glynis came out many, many years ago, there was a little audio clip of the MP3 that I have of Glynis, at least. I forget exactly where it came from, but there's a little clip of Billy talking, and he says something about, I don't subscribe to the politics of AIDS and things like that, but, this was a case where, we were trying to help a single person, so I recorded this song and took part in this no alternative thing that Glynis was a part of. So, this is kind of similar to that Billy doesn't necessarily believe in the politics of everything around this Joseph Kony video, but of course Billy doesn't hate children or anything like that.
let me chip in with another example quickly. In 2007, the Pumpkins went to play Live Earth, and Billy got a lot of criticism because he didn't say anything about the cause, really. Not much of anything, and he did say, we got a new album coming out. So he was criticized for basically being all about music and about his band when this event was supposed to be about, whatever the heck it was supposed to be about, right? But, I'm sure a lot of people are like, Billy Corgan doesn't care about the environment, man. He doesn't care about the planet. Yeah,
there are true believers on both sides. People like to, accuse the people who believe in UFOs and that kinds of things of being true believers, because there is no evidence that will sway them, and that's true. But I think there's also true believers on the other side, like in things like the Green Movement and stuff like that are also unwilling to hear any sort of evidence. So I think that's just what Billy's trying to avoid, becoming part of one of those camps.
Yeah, during the Alex Jones interview, Billy says something like, he's never criticized more than when he raises questions about, narratives around climate change or whatever. And then he immediately, as an example, he said, if he raises questions about a possible carbon tax, right?
Yep.
And to me, there's a really important distinction between the question of, is our climates getting hotter? And the question of what we are to do about it.
Absolutely. I agree 100%.
Question A, I think is, there seems to be pretty much a consensus among the people who really study this, right? And, I think Billy, you pin him down, I think he would kind of defer to those people. He seems willing to question it, which, is fine. I think a lot of people, do wonder about this or that. And, you can argue, lots of people have pointed out, hey, the climate scientists have been wrong before, right? And now maybe 40 years later, they're smarter, right? And they probably are. I don't really doubt the consensus, but it seems to be very few people who do, right? But the question of what to do about it, to me is totally wide open, And
yeah, I would say there's a scientific debate and there's a political debate, and I think sometimes some of the parties like to, in the name of their political position, try and throw sand on the scientific position or twist the scientific position around. But in general, you're exactly right. I think that the idea that, there is this trend that the Earth is warming is not a debate. It's like many studies have been done. There's a lot of data that says that.
Yeah.
And then there's additional questions with climate change around, first of all, the Earth is warming, but the climate of the Earth has constantly been changing, obviously, for millions of years. So is this a problem, and is this man-made? And that's also, I think, more of a scientific debate that's more ongoing. I think that there is a bit of a consensus that, man has caused a lot of the change that's going on right now. But what you're saying and what Billy said, you're exactly right. So the point Billy made is that he was upset when he would get a lot of grief when he would question a carbon tax. And the idea of a carbon tax that has nothing to do with the scientific debate of climate change. That is all about the political debate of what do we do about it, if anything, about climate change.
Yeah, I mean, people who have listened to this podcast a long time probably know I'm an economics student. And I wrote in the comments on one of the recent on the post about Alex Jones. I mean, the idea that a carbon tax is like that there's some some hard ass science that supports that that's the right policy. There's nothing like that. I mean, it's totally open-ended debate. So there's a million ways to go about fixing any problem, which includes maybe just flat tolerating it. You know what I mean?
Right.
So and just carrying on. So
I mean, there's one part of what Billy said about the climate change thing that I did take issue with, and that's he made a point about, when there's a lot of corporate money behind something, how can a liberal class be comfortable with that relationship? And I think he pointed out something about Monsanto being on the side of the green movement. And yeah, I think this is kind of a logical fallacy where if you have an idea or a belief and a corporation either happens to agree with you or happens to be benefited by that idea somehow is flawed. And unfortunately, with this climate change issue, there's corporate money on both sides. There's corporations that are in favor of carbon taxes and doing things like that because they would benefit from it, and there are corporations and lobbies that would benefit from not doing that. So I don't think in this debate you can have a position that is not also espoused by what one side or the other could consider an evil corporation.
So, should Billy have gone on Alex Jones? Chris, is even talking to Alex Jones in Alex Jones's studio helping perpetuate the cause of pseudoscience and conspiracy theories of the probably false kind? Like you said, this was the Alex Jones show. He's a guest of Alex Jones in Alex Jones's studio. You're not going to go in there and, be a real douche, and bring it to Alex Jones, right? I mean, but that's why the question then becomes, should you have gone on at all, right? What do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a good question, and I think that, I won't say whether he should or shouldn't have. I think that I don't think going on the show hurt the cause of science and rationalism or anything like that. I guess you could argue that a famous person giving credence to someone like Alex Jones, who espouses a lot of anti-rationalistic conspiracy theories, that props him up, that gets him web traffic and gives him money and gets him attention, and that makes his movement more visible. But at the same time, you can't just entirely ignore someone and expect them to go away. You do have to engage with them somehow, and if you are going to engage with them, you're right, you can't go on their show, on their turf, and just rip into them and expect that that's going to be, that you're going to win. I could not go on Alex Jones's program, and I would not consider myself at all a good scientific debater, but even someone who would consider themselves that, I don't think would be able to go on Alex Jones's show and debate him so skillfully that anyone listening to his show would change their mind and come back to the side of rationalism. I don't think that's going to happen. I think if you're going to go on his show, you have to do kind of what Billy did and just not blindly agree with everything he says, and make sure that the points you're making are really what you believe and what you want to say, and not get caught up in what Alex Jones' agenda is, that everything in the world is caused by some sort of corporate new world order that's trying to control things. I mean, I don't want to make up a straw man here, but a lot of what he was saying seems to be this fear of corporate involvement in things and fear that there is a all-controlling body of people that, want to strip away all of our freedoms or something like that. So, I really have no problem with Billy going on the show. The only time Billy, I thought, really slipped up a little bit and kind of got out of, just kind of making the points he was trying to make that were fairly reasonable was he had a little throwaway line, near the end of the show. It started to go off the rails a little bit. Alex Jones started to talk more and Billy talked less, and as a result there was some more conspiracy stuff being talked about, and Billy just throws out this line about Ayn Rand being a member of the Illuminati, just like it wasn't discussed at all. Like she's like, oh, and I read the other day that she was a member of the Illuminati, and then they moved on.
Yeah, I don't know. I've been a moderate fan of Alex Jones, and when I say fan, I think more a fan of the entertainment value of his radio program than anything else. I have been known to sometimes put on his show on the radio if there's nothing else that's pleasing me in my car. And he's really, he's kind of wacky, but he is not as wacky as, some of the other things that are out there. Like, he's not really talking about UFOs or Atlanteans or
does he get into the lizard people thing, that all high-ranking government officials are descend from aliens or are lizard people or something like that?
He's really on this thing about this idea of a classical, he always harks back to this idea of a classical democracy. It's very Enlightenment, right? Like the 18th century, the Constitution, our founders, liberties, and he thinks that that's being, diluted by corporate intrusions into our life, and he does take it to this level where there's this conspiracy where elites, the globalists,
them, they, he made so many references in this to them and they
are sitting around and plotting, and I don't know. I think there's something compelling about Alex Jones to me. I don't really, I can't really put my finger on it, but.
Yeah, honestly, like, I think a lot of what Alex Jones raises are, interesting. A lot of it is actually quite real, but when I say it's real, I mean the events are real, but the imagined, like, diabolical, like, conspiracy behind it is probably not real, and very probably not real. So it's, so he may have, like, it's kind of sad because I look at him and, like, I kind of feel his sympathy for him as, like, this man struggling to understand the world, but, like, kind of has this view of, like, everything that is being deliberately caused by some committee somewhere, and that I don't really agree with.
Yeah, my main reaction to all conspiracy theorists is I kind of feel bad for them because it must be scary to think that, you really have no control over anything and there's some other people that are controlling, like, every important aspect of your life, or that, that everything that happens is a sign of some greater evil that's trying to swoop in. And it's just that kind of worldview. If I believed that, I would be very scared all the time.
Jones is often described as a libertarian, and I basically consider myself a libertarian. And what's strange about Jones's, like, variety of political thought is that in libertarianism there's a concept called spontaneous order, which basically says we don't need a central planning committee to organize society, right? Because people following their own interests locally generates a wider order spontaneously, right? That's the concept. Alex Jones seems not to have gotten the memo on spontaneous order, which is strange to me because it seems so fundamental to so many libertarians' thought. he basically thinks, even though America doesn't have a central planning committee a la the Soviet Union, we still do. It's just secret.
It's just
right?
secret.
Yeah. And
any lack of evidence of that is proof that they're just really good at hiding it.
Yeah. So that's strange to me. But
the only other thing that Billy said that I really take issue with was later on in the show, he said something along the lines of, it's fine that people disagree with me, as long as you do so because of personal intuition. The only other option is if you disagree with me, you're a corporate robot that's like being controlled by outside forces. Yeah, robots. And I would argue that there's a third option that I can disagree with Billy because the premise that he is arguing in that particular case is not based on any sort of evidence, which is how I feel about his belief in chemtrails. It's not personal intuition that tells me that the government isn't spraying mind control chemicals in the sky to suppress free expression or to make us sick. I mean, it's the fact that there's no evidence that this is the case and no evidence that their resulting goal of making us sick is actually happening. So
Chris, just look in the sky, man. I mean, you can totally tell a chemtrail from a normal contrail. I mean, just look at the way they diffuse. I mean, it's obvious to anyone with knowledge of how these things work.
They're all chemtrails, Jason. There are no normal contrails.
You're just not looking closely enough.
But I mean, at the same time, as far as I'm aware, at least, I mean, and then again, maybe they're just doing a really good job, but there are no corporate interests that are pumping out a message that chemtrails aren't real. It's not like there's a concerted anti-chemtrails lobby that is founded by Apple or something like that, So I don't see what corporate brainwashing could be going on here. So I would take issue with that, but I don't think that overall, I think what Billy was saying on the show about how you need to question authority and question things that are told to you that you haven't personally looked into. I would agree with that. I think it's valid. I don't think you always need to, if there is someone who is a climate scientist, for instance, who says they have this data that shows something, and other climate scientists have said the same thing, and they've done their own independent studies, I don't think that, it's necessarily that important for me to do my own study to try and agree or disagree with them. But in general, and especially in terms of political discussion, I would agree with what Billy has said in this interview. It definitely, I would say, was not an explosive interview. The awakening has begun. I mean, it just wasn't.
I wouldn't be surprised to see Billy kind of fall silent on the chemtrails thing, and not because and here's why. My perception of Billy is that he's really only started thinking about political philosophy in the last 5 or 6 years. Like when he told the story, like he's holed up in Arizona or wherever working on Zeitgeist, and he's watching cable news all the time, right? And I feel like that's pretty much the first time in his life he was really doing that. And I think falling into stuff like belief in chemtrails or whatever is kind of, forgive me the Carlsism here. It's kind of entry level political philosophy. You know what I mean? You see, teenagers and stuff getting sucked into belief in that sort of thing, right?
Well, I was just going to say, when I was a kid and a teenager, there is not a book about spontaneous combustion or UFOs or Atlantis that I did not read.
Exactly.
I loved that stuff.
And and I don't want to overdraw this because people say all the time, Billy Corgan is trapped in teenagerdom. His songs are so emo. He's never grown up. I don't think that's true. Generally, but I think on the political philosophy that actually is true, though I don't think I've ever seen anybody say that about Billy with regard to political philosophy. But I'm saying it now. I think he hasn't really thought about politics for very long. And I think you see, if you watched his interviews in a line over the last 5 years, I think I see increasing sophistication almost on an interview by interview basis, And I think for him to be able to sit there and talk for an hour about political philosophy and do basically and related issues of culture and come off pretty good, pretty provocative, not too crazy is an accomplishment. I don't think there's a lot of adults out there who can do it. And I really don't think he's been thinking about this stuff for very long. But he's already figured out not to talk about the chemtrails, right?
Yeah.
And I haven't seen him tweet about the chemtrails lately.
I was just going to say, it's been a little while. I hope you're right. I hope that he is not going to continue with the chemtrails stuff.
But see, here's the thing. why do you not believe in chemtrails? It's not because you saw a scientific study that disproves it. There's no such thing. But that's something that you have to figure out as you learn about political philosophy. You have to learn that there's no knockdown study for anything, right?
Well, and that you can't disprove a negative, especially when it comes to this conspiracy theory stuff, where any proof otherwise is just part of the conspiracy.
But again,
there's
yeah, but again, kind of an entry-level worldview on science and philosophy and stuff is that things can be proved, right? And older people, have learned that, well, that's not actually true. You can't really prove anything. You have to more like follow a preponderance of whatever pre-commitments and evidence, and you just come to your conclusion, right?
Right. A lot of science isn't like I did a study and this is the 100% proof. It's using error bars and the 95% certainty. The results that I saw in this study came from this. Now, please, everyone else, go out and repeat it. And if everyone else gets the same types of results, then this becomes scientific fact, quote unquote.
Yeah, I mean,
you're right. It's not as simple as I did a study. It is true.
I mean, if we could do that, then nobody would be disputing things like climate change or evolution. But if you go back and read The Origin of Species, how does Darwin argue? He talks about he makes this real he starts talking about well, look at domesticated animals, and it's this very thorough, literate argument, right? It's not something he runs a study and gets a numeric answer, right? Which is why people can not understand it, a lot of people don't understand it because it's hard to figure it out.
One thing that I think is interesting or compelling about their discussion to me, and I don't I guess this is taking away from the discussion of science and bringing it more back to this idea of politics or classical democracy. Both Billy and Alex Jones seem to have this respect for the Constitution, for the 18th century, and this is something I've thought a lot about over the past 5 or 6 years of my life. Is that there's when I was in graduate school, I was thinking a lot about the Enlightenment and these kinds of thinkers, and early democracy is viewed by many as this ideal time where people could really get together in coffee shops and really talk to one another and critique structures of power. And there's this scholarly consensus among historians seemingly that we've lost that, right? And that's something that Alex Jones and Billy seem to agree with. And when I started graduate school in 2005, I was sort of a dyed-in-the-wool Democratic Party, pro-big government, pro-higher taxes, all these things. And I really believed in the power of government to make positive change in people's lives. And then as I got to graduate school and was exposed to these theories that sort of said we've lost something. We at one time had this vibrant public sphere in the 18th and 19th century where people were fired up about politics, and now it's kind of been co-opted by these corporate interests, or it's been co-opted by the growth of the state sort of squelching people's own free will. At first that was strange for me, and then I just remember, I've TA'd United States history, the 20th century United States history, a couple of times. And when you're reading, 100 undergraduate essays, you have to write an essay and state your perspective on presidential power and the growth of presidential power over the 20th century. And not one person in the class, not a single person out of 100 student essay writers in an undergraduate class at a university is willing to critique whether or not these people, I'm talking about people across the political spectrum, Republicans, Democrats, conservative liberals, not one of these people is willing to critique, to say anything remotely negative about the growth of presidential power over the course of the 20th century. That really started to get me thinking. So in some ways, I think this argument that Alex Jones and Billy are making is really compelling. And I think it's something that scholars are debating. Now, they're not doing it with all the language and the references that, historians are doing it, but it's something that I think is a really compelling question. I think it's the questions that a lot of people in our times are struggling to answer. And I found that really compelling and interesting, encouraging that Billy, who I guess I kind of admire, is trying to think through these things. I'm not sure that I necessarily agree with his and Alex Jones' solution, which is, I don't know, it seemed to be return to a time of like the early republic and constitutional founders time. And I could go more into that, but the sort of the
Hipsters United, a blog about the Constitution. Hipsters.
Postmodernism versus I would characterize myself as a postmodernist and whatever. I don't have to go into that, but I don't necessarily think that we need to hark back to those past times, but as the solution. But I mean, I think that they're really onto something, and I agree with them. The questions that they're asking are not questions that most people in America are asking. Of have we lost the ideal of our democracy? And I think that's an incredibly valid question, and it's one that I think about a lot in my own sort of inner political life. So, in that level, I found both of them fairly compelling, although I don't necessarily agree with all of their solutions to the problem. So, I don't know.
It's funny, I expected before doing this podcast that I would get, that I would go on a science rant and, get criticized by the people that usually criticize me on the blog when I make comments to that regard for, not having an open mind and stuff like that. Instead, I think it's going to be the other way around. I think I'm going to get criticized by the people that I fundamentally agree with for, giving Billy a free pass or something.
Yeah, why didn't you go after him for that Illuminati stuff? I think you did. I think he did, though. I mean, what did we most criticize? Probably this worldview that a conspiracy is behind everything, right? So I don't think he got a free pass on that.
Yeah. I don't know. The Illuminati thing was stupid, but it clearly wasn't his main point. So, yeah, it's dumb. But to nitpick on that and not discuss what he actually was saying, I think would be unfair.
That would be something the mainstream media would do. That would be something BuzzFeed would do. That would be something Gaper's Block would do, Chris.
That should have been the headline on HU. Billy Corgan outs Ayn Rand as member of the Illuminati.
Yeah. If anyone thinks HU is a negative blog about the Smashing Pumpkins, what would we have done with this if we were negative? Okay? Just think about it a little. Thank you.
Yeah. I mean, when I see some of there's not been a whole lot of coverage of this interview in the media, but I mean, was it Gaper's Block that called Billy Corgan like conservative or something out of this interview?
Yeah,
like
if he was airing his conservative political opinion.
I mean, to me, the really compelling political argument of the next 50 to 100 years is not going to be liberal versus conservative. It's going to be authoritarian versus anti-authoritarian. And, I mean, I think that Billy acquitted himself very well in that regard in this podcast. And I think that, I don't know, if you're going to listen to him and think that he is advocating a quote-unquote conservative worldview, I mean, maybe conservative in some kind of small C view where he's harking back to the Enlightenment 18th century, but those people, I don't know. Anyway, it's very annoying to me, very frustrating to me when I see people who are basically out to get Billy characterizing him that way and not listening at all to, in earnest, to what he has to say.
I mean, you got a country right now where 2/3 of the people, not right now, I mean, this is just the way it's been for quite a while, 2/3 of the people will identify as Republican or Democrat, right? Like pretty conventionally. Well, you have those people, who are like watching CNN or whatever and like believing that's a like important debate that's going on or whatever, and they're picking their side very solemnly, right? I'm with Sean Hannity. I'm with Keith Olbermann, right? I mean, have them sit down and watch this interview where Billy's like expressing sympathy with the Occupy movement. Then he's saying he doesn't want his wealth redistributed. Then he's like being complimentary to people who are organizing collectives, and it's like they'd just be totally confused. Like, what is this guy on about, So, Chicagoist. For anyone who doesn't know what Gaper's Block is, it's like an online newspaper about Chicago. Chicagoist is like part of that national network of like city-focused things. So they're basically competitors. Chicagoist did a much longer write-up. They basically said Alex Jones is libertarian, and they didn't try to characterize Billy, and they said there was plenty to raise eyebrows across the political spectrum in this talk. So I think that's fair. And would you rather have a conversation with Billy Corgan or a conversation with somebody who's just going to tell you what you already know that Republicans and Democrats would say? I think I'd rather talk to Billy.
Well, thanks for joining us this week. Our closing song is a single from Tiergarten, and also Billy's, I guess, most directly conspiracy theory-esque song, Freak, complete with enough references to they in the song to make Alex Jones proud. And it's live from Houston, Texas on December 5th, 2010, taped by Jason himself. Good night, everybody. The Hipsters United podcast is not affiliated with or endorsed by the Smashing Pumpkins, Virgin Records, or Warner Brothers Reprise Records. All opinions offered by panelists or guests of the Hipsters United podcast are their own and do not represent the opinions of the Smashing Pumpkins. All audio during the show is licensed for non-profit use per the terms and conditions on the Live Music Archive at archive.org. Intro music is from the Machina 2 album released for free download on the internet by the Smashing Pumpkins in September of 2000.